Kentucky on the 1st of October, 1921. So I'm 87 years old at the moment, going on 88. And I shoot below my age in golf. Now, when I was growing up, I had a sister and then a brother. My father was a carpenter, and I grew up in Louisville, went to the schools there. And I always had a lot of model airplanes that I've enjoyed building with rubber bands and propeller to fly, free flight. And I was crazy about flying. So when Pearl Harbor was hit, the draft, I was the draft age, and I enlisted in the Army Airforce is what it was in those days. And you had to go, you're supposed to have a 2-year college education, and then you had to pass the physical. So I took the written exams, passed those, and I went to take the physical exam, and I was about 4 pounds underweight. So the doctor gave me 2 weeks to come back, and he sent me back home and said, drink all the milkshakes you can take, and eat everything that's fattening. And before you come in to get weighed, you eat all the bananas that you can hold, and then drink all the water, and I made 133 pounds, got in the service, and it wasn't too long thereafter that I was called to duty. And I left Louisville on a train for the first trip on a train to Nashville, Tennessee. I was a civilian at that point. I got off the train in Nashville, and I'm up to it already. And they put us in a barracks, and they didn't have any beds. So we had to sleep on the floor of the barracks. Then the next day they get us up and sent us down to the clothing shop to get our clothes, our uniforms at the time. So I was there and got a little orientation on what was going to happen. From there I went to Maxwell Air Force Base, and that was a pre-flight school.
Clarification on this, did you know that you're going to be a flyer when you joined the Army?
Yes, that's what I went in for,
yeah.
Aviation Cadet Program. From Maxwell, it was pre-flight, and we'd have all the physical training, marching, running 5 miles a day, and really no visitors to speak of because you were in a military compound. And we didn't do any flying at Maxwell Field. It was all pre-flight, as they call it, learning about engines, learning about weather, learning about everything that you have to know about what's going on to fly an airplane.
How big was your was it a platoon that you were in, or a company?
Well, it was an aviation cadet program, and it was called a class. And this class probably had maybe 100 people in it. And these 100 maybe ended up with 50 at the end because they washed out. So from Maxwell Field, I went to Arcadia, Florida. And that was a Embry-Riddle flying school, civilian school, but the place was all fenced in, and we had to eat, as they call, square meals, and there was an upperclassman. This upperclassman hazed the lowerclassmen all the time. If you did anything wrong, you had to walk a tour with a parachute on your back, with a parachute hanging out. So I started flying a PT-17, which is a single-engine bi-wing, 2 wings, with 2 open cockpits, one behind the other. And the instructor took you up and showed you how to do this and that, and finally you went into solo. And this field was about a mile square of grass, and they had another field, auxiliary field that you'd go over to and practice landings on and continue your flying. So you graduated, you was a lower classman, then you went to the upperclassman, and then you transferred to Bainbridge, Georgia, and there were BT 13s were there, and they were a little more advanced airplane. It had a constant speed propeller, and it was a single engine, single seat, and we did training in this airplane for a couple of months, and then we moved from Bainbridge to Marianna, Florida, and went to what they call an AT-6. And this was more advanced. It had gear that would go up and down and flaps that would go up and down, constant speed prop, and radios that you could talk to each other. It had a seat up front and a seat in the back. And of course, you had an instructor to begin with in all of these planes. And from that adventure, we went to Venice, Florida. And the airport there was a big concrete runway, and we went to P-47s, which was a single-seat fighter. It was like a tank, and it had 4 50 caliber machine guns, and each wing had 8 50 caliber machine guns. And we started flying against tow targets, shooting bullets at them, and bombs in a bombing range off the Gulf, and graduated in out of that thing.
What year, honey?
1943, as a second lieutenant. So from there we went to Tallahassee. We flew P-47s in Tallahassee, Florida. More training, more bombing, more machine guns. And then we got shipped to Fort Hamilton, New York, and there's about 100 pilots on a converted cruise ship called the Isle de France. It was a French ship, and there was 100 pilots in my status on board that ship, and we took us 6 or 7 days to go across the Atlantic. And we landed in Scotland, and again that was another training base, and they put us up in the barracks, and we were flying P-47s there as well. So by the time from there I went to a unit, and this unit was composed. It was called the 359th Fighter Group. And they had 3 squadrons, the 368th, 369th, and the 370th. And they were flying P-47s off a grass field in East Wretham, England, which is in East Anglia, and it was midway between Norwich and Cambridge. So we got transitioned into that outfit, and we started flying combat missions. We would take 3 squadrons of fighters and take off, farm up into flights of 8, 4 and 4, and we would rendezvous with the bombers and escort the bombers to keep the German planes off the bombers. And we flew faster than the bombers, so we went above them and zigzagged back and forth over the bombers as the bomber stream was going. The bomber stream had to go straight, and when they got to their IP, they couldn't do it. They couldn't vary at all, and the flak would be coming up like you wouldn't believe and blowing them out of the sky. And we were watching for the fighters to keep the fighters off of them. So D-Day came along, June 6th, and we were assigned an area to fly. By then we'd converted over to another airplane. We converted over to P-51s, which had a longer range and could escort bombers all the way into Berlin. The P-47 didn't have enough range to do that. So D-Day, we used our P-51s to fly over the French countryside and some of the German countryside and like patrol, and we were supposed to shoot anything that moved on the ground other than a civilian ox cart or any kind of civilian that we could determine. So then the D-Day came along, and I flew 3 missions on D-Day from dawn to dusk. Flew over there and flew around and patrolled, and then came back and rearmed and refueled, and 3 times.
What type of targets?
We were targets of opportunity that were on the ground, like tanks or military vehicles, anything, or a train, anything that had any military consequence, we were allowed to shoot. Anything that was civilian, we weren't allowed to touch. So we were at low altitude, we weren't at high altitude, and we were cruising at low speed, and that was the D-Day trip.
What, did you look out and see the ships and the men coming?
Oh,
in?
yeah.
What was it like?
Oh, it's well, like you see on television when they redo the D-Day thing, just thousands and thousands of ships and hundreds of thousands of men, I guess, just all over the place. Now, we weren't allowed to get over that area, except the water. You could see the ships in the channel.
Why was that?
Well, if we had something go wrong with us and the Germans were shooting at us as well as them, and they could just as well shoot at us and knock us down, and we wouldn't be able to do our mission. So we always had a prescribed mission, and I have a record of every mission I flew. We have a flying record called a Farm 5, which has every day and every time and where you went and what happened on that mission. So we also have a unit history, which this unit's historian has gotten out of the archives and where they had all this history. And every day there was a history officer. You got interviewed after your mission by an intelligence officer, and you told him exactly what happened. And this was all put on paper, and it's still available. So then around June the 12th, we were on a mission, and I was crossing out from the mission into the channel, and I got as far as Calais, France, and a Calais anti-aircraft hit my plane, and I had to bail out of the airplane, and I landed, we wore a parachute on the back, and we had a dinghy, which is a one-man life raft that we sat on, and then we had a Mae West over our thing. And then we had on a civilian, we had a long underwear first, then we had civilian clothes on, and then we wore a winter flying suit, which was the fur-lined pants and fur-lined top.
Why would you wear civilian clothes?
In case you got shot down, it would help you to invade. You had a .45 pistol strapped to this side of you, and you had your escape and evasion kit over on this side. So when I bailed out, I had all this on, and it was hard getting out of the airplane. I finally got out, and
Did you have a lot of time to get out of the airplane?
no, it was the engine was hit, and the oil was coming out of the engine all over me, and I couldn't see what I was doing. So I got out about 3,000 feet, I guess.
Tell them what body of water.
It was in the English Channel, Calais, France. It's about 20 miles or so across the channel at that point to England. So when I pulled the chute, it opened, and then this dinghy that was strapped onto the chute harness flew out of this harness, and it had a lanyard on it, and the lanyard stopped it. So I thought, well, I'll pull this dinghy in and have it ready to get into in the water. Well, I pull it in and it had a big hole in it like that. For where the bottle was, the bottle went after the lanyard stopped it and it went out. So I let that go. And when I go in the water, I pull the Mae West, and it's choppy and it's very, very cold. It had all these clothes on, so I was having a hard time staying afloat. And somebody in our flight radioed in that I was down, and they sent a British Walrus, which was an amphibious airplane. It came down and picked me up.
Tell them how long you were under.
And I was in the water probably 20, 25 minutes. And I can only tell you what they told me happened because I'd already drowned, passed out in the water. And they had a dye that you could pull, a yellow dye that you could pull that would show them where you were in the water. So this fellow landed, picked me up, and he had where I was put in the plane had hot water bottles. And this is what they tell me happened. They put me in these hot water bottles to bring my body temperature up. So he couldn't take off, it was too rough, and the guy was shooting at him at the same time from Calais anti-aircraft. He taxis back to England, and I wake up in the hospital. It was an American hospital, and I woke up laying on this like metal bed, and when I opened my eyes, there's all these bright lights were shining down on me, and I thought I'd gone down below. So, not up above, but down below in the heat. So they were bringing my body temperature back, and they got me to where I could breathe. And so then this American nurse took me under her wing and put me in a bed, and I didn't have a stitch closed, so I didn't have anything other than just the body. And I couldn't talk. I couldn't move anything in my body except my eyelids. So when she figured all this out, and she said, when I ask you a question, you can answer yes or no by blinking your eyes twice for yes and once for no. And that went on for about a week. And I was finally recovering to where I could start talking. And she says, well, you're going to have to get up, and we have to get you some clothes. And she said, I'll take you down to where the clothing place is in a wheelchair, and we'll get you some clothes. And then we're going to start riding a bicycle. You and I are going to start riding a bicycle. We're going to go a half a block one first day and back, and a block the next, and so forth. So I was in this hospital for a month to where I could get up and walk and eat and do what I have to do. So then that was a month from June to July, and then they sent me to Edinburgh, Scotland for another 30 days, what they call R&R, rest and recovery, recuperate. And I get back to the unit, and that was 2 months gone. When I get back, I'm a ranking lieutenant, so they promoted me right away to first lieutenant and gave me a flight. So I was leading the 4 airplanes in a flight. So I finished that tour, and I got home with, I think I flew 67 missions in that war.
Most of the missions were...
There was support. 8th Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
There's an 8th Air Force museum in Savannah, Georgia.
Yeah.
And our unit is represented there. And so...
Did you do any more ground close air support?
Whenever we went on a mission of escorting the bombers, if a bomber was hit and maybe lost an engine or was aborting from their mission, our mission at that point was to escort that bomber back to England. If you were done with your escort to the target and you didn't have a bomber to bring back, then you were able to come back and take targets of opportunity on the way back. Sometimes we did, sometimes we didn't, because we flew with wing tanks, and you could stay up in that airplane for 8 hours if you were up there for 8 hours, you landed and you couldn't get out. You were so tired from sitting in one crane. The cockpit wasn't any bigger than this chair. Then you had all this stuff on you. And we were in good shape because we were young, and we didn't weigh too much, and we used a bicycle all the time to where we went, back and forth on the base. So from there, I get back to the States, and they gave us, I had gotten married in the service, and I have a young daughter, about 5 months old. When I get back, and she didn't know me from Adam, she knew me on the refrigerator, but not in person. So I go to Miami Beach for 2 weeks. They gave us a little trip down there. And then I got sent to Kingman, Arizona. In Kingman, Arizona, they had P-39s, which flew, and they had P-63s, which were armor-plated. And these planes would fly into a bomber, and the bomber would shoot plastic bullets at the airplane. We were the target for them to shoot down. And these plastic bullets, when they hit the airplane, there's a counter would go off in the cockpit telling us how many hits the guy got. So P-39s and P-63s, and we finally went out of that, and we went to outside of Dallas, Texas, to a place called Greenville. And I was flying P-47s there, and we were instructing Turkish pilots on how to fly, and they didn't speak English, we didn't speak Turkish. So we had to communicate on the ground through an interpreter, and then we had hand signals that we could use in the air. We'd come down, we'd debrief through an interpreter and instruct these guys how to fly these airplanes. So I got through that, and the war was getting over, and they didn't want us anymore, so they let us out. By then I was a captain. And I got out of the service, went back to Louisville, and I went to work as a carpenter. My father was a carpenter. I got in the union and was a carpenter. And I got into Kentucky Air National Guard. I was flying P-51s till 1950. And in 1950, the Korean War came about, and they activated all of us that were in the Guard, and they shipped us from Louisville to Fort Knox, Kentucky. We flew out of Godman Field at Fort Knox, Kentucky. And next thing you know, here comes the orders for you to go to Korea. So meanwhile, during this time frame, when the Korean War broke out, they wanted airplanes in Korea, so they took 10 of our airplanes, and I had the job of taking those 10 airplanes to Sacramento, California, for what the DRI, they call it, redoing the airplane and making sure everything's copacetic. So we were getting ready to leave, and I'm a civilian, but on active duty for a couple of days to fly the airplane. So they said, okay, we're ready to go back. And this airplane had no room to carry any luggage. All you could carry was this little thing under your seat. So you could carry your shaving kit, a pair of underwear, and socks, and that was it. So we got ready to go back. We were going back civilian air, and the guy says, you're not going back. You're going to take some of these reconditioned airplanes and fly them over to a Navy base on the coast, west coast of the United States. So we get in about 10 more airplanes and fly over there, and we land on this base, and we taxi down the streets of this naval base down to a dock. And as soon as we get out of the airplane, all these maintenance people start putting stuff all over the airplane. Every hole in the airplane had to be covered with something to keep the air out. And there was an aircraft carrier sitting right there on the dock. So next thing you know, here comes the captain of this aircraft carrier and introduces himself. He says, "Come on, I'm going to show you the carrier and show you where you're going to be living." And I said, "Now wait a minute, we're not really on active duty. We're just ferrying these airplanes." He said, "Oh no, you're going with us with these airplanes to Korea." So they.
So, just to get this, straight, is that you were just told you're going to be for temporary duty for a few days?
Yeah.
And then,
Then when we get there, he said we're going to Korea.
what did you tell your wife?
Hijack.
Well, I didn't have any chance to tell her, but I knew that wasn't so. So I had him send a Twix back to where we were, and we got off the carrier and went home, which was a blessing. But then, lo and behold, I'm in Fort Knox, Kentucky, and orders come for me to go to Korea to fly in a P-51 outfit. So I got transferred to Phoenix, Arizona, to Luke Air Force Base. And that was supposed to be a P-51 orientation course, which I didn't really need because I've been flying them for years. And from there, we went directly to Korea. And when I get to Korea, sure enough, I had to go through another orientation to get the locals what to do. And the same airplanes that I ferried over there were in this outfit.
Waiting for you.
So I flew something like 67, 68 missions over there.
What type of missions did you fly?
We flew ground support. We would carry 2 500-pound bombs. We had 6 rockets and machine guns. And our job was where the troops were in the front line was to either bomb, napalm, or strafe, or rocket those troops, those enemy troops on the ground. And I ended up as a major there in Korea, and all of a sudden there was a whole bunch of pilots came in. We were required to fly 100 missions, then we could go home, but we got so many people in, they allowed the higher mission people to go early, so they let me go early.
Can we talk about a couple, what would be a typical mission that you would fly? Could you probably trace the timeline on one, a typical?
Well, we had 2 bases in Korea. We had a rear base where the maintenance of the airplanes took place primarily. That was K-46, no, K-16. And K-46 was up by Seoul, and that was close to the front line. And we had the honor of living in tents and sleeping bags. And in the morning, when the mission would start, they'd get us out of bed, and they'd issue us a small canteen of water. And that was our water for our teeth, for our bathing, and that was it. That's all the water you could get for bathing purposes. So you had on your flying suit, you'd report down to a briefing, and airplanes would be armed, whatever they were required to be armed with. You go to this briefing, and they'd tell you where you were going, what you were going to do. And we didn't have fuel tanks. All we had was bombs because our missions weren't that long. In fact, by Seoul, I flew 3 missions in one day. You just take off from the airport, you'd fly up here and shoot and do your thing, come back down. And you were within distance of landing if you got hit by flak to land at the airport that you were stationed at. So we did that, and then we would go from that kind of a mission up to where the troops were. And they had some kind of radar that they could check us with and guide us into where we were going. And if we couldn't see the target, if it was obscured by clouds or fog or something, we would close up this group, and there'd be 16 airplanes, 4 flights of floor, and we'd close it up tight. And this guy would guide us to a point, and he'd say when to toggle off your bombs. So you'd just be flying straight and level, and bingo, punch a button and your 2 bombs would go off. That was the end of the mission. If you could see what you were doing, then you'd go and put the bomb on the target. They would have an airplane that was a spotter that would take us to a target once we got up close by, and this guy would shoot a flare or something like that into where you were supposed to go with the ordnance. And then we'd come back. That was about the size of it. We always carried 2 rockets. They were proximity fused rockets, because if a MiG, we couldn't fight a MiG, a jet, a Russian jet, or a Chinese jet, whatever it was. We were too slow, but we could outturn them. So if a MiG would come in to bounce you, you'd try to see him, of course, and you would turn before he could turn, because a jet took a big space to turn. And these rockets, you could send them off after that MiG. When they got close to him, they'd go off, and it scared them away.
Did you get in a situation like that occasionally?
Couple of times, yeah.
What happened?
Well, I never got hit. I'm still here, and they chased them away. So we got through that, and we had a squadron of South African Air Force pilots with us in Korea, and they were the elite of South African whites, and they were big, huge men, and they just barely fit in the cockpit of these airplanes. But at our rear base, we had a little better accommodation than a tent in a sleeping bag. We slept in Quonset huts, and we had metal beds. But we had an officers club there, and every night that I was there, these South Africans would come to this club, and they'd do the Zulu war dance. And they'd bust a hole in the wooden floor, stomp a hole in the floor with, "Throw me down, you Zulu warrior." You maybe have 20 guys doing that on a hardwood floor, and it didn't take long to punch a hole in the floor. Then it was over with. So we'd go over to Japan, to Tokyo. We'd go over there for R&R. One day we were with a couple of those guys, and we were going up to this place in an elevator, and a Japanese girl was running the elevator, and these guys started doing that on the elevator, and this elevator was going like this. This girl turned white as a sheet, was ready to faint, I think. She's happy to see us go out. Well, Korea got over with. I get home from there, and I get assigned to Tyndall Air Force Base, which is in Panama City, Florida. I had to go to New York City first, and from New York City I had to go to Tyndall, and I was sent to the Air Defense Command to become a radar scope dope. You would be an air controller, where you'd see a target on the scope, and you'd take a fighter, and on the scope you'd put these things together.
Now, how old were you at that point in time?
How old? That was 50. I can't remember.
32, about 32 maybe.
32 or 3
So you
years
get a little
old.
bit old to be a fighter pilot at that point? Or?
No, I was still flying fighters. I flew them down at Tyndall.
Okay.
But then I went to this radar business, which you don't have any choice when you're in the military. You go where they send you. So I went through this school, and I got stationed at Palermo, New Jersey. Then we were in the air defense of the Northeast United States, from Norfolk, Virginia, to Maine, over to Buffalo, New York. It's the area that I was in. So I was sitting in a dark room with radar scopes on shift work, an 8-hour shift, which was 8 to 4, 4 to 12, and 12 to 8. And I had to go to an air base to fly. And I got a T-33, which was a jet trainer, at Newcastle County Airport. And from Palermo, New Jersey, I was there for 2 years. And then from Palermo, New Jersey, well, I got promoted to major by then. So they sent me from Palermo down to Cape Charles, Virginia as a squadron commander of a radar site there. Cape Charles is just north of Norfolk, Virginia. So from there I flew at Langley Air Force Base. You had to fly your time to get paid. You had to be physically fit and not have a cold or anything to fly. So from Cape Charles, Virginia, I went to Syracuse, New York, and I went into a general officer's staff at Syracuse, New York, which was the headquarters for this entire Northeast Air Defense Command. So I was there from 1956 to 1962, but in 1957 they gave me an opportunity of another tour in Iceland. So I was a major at that time, and I had been a squadron commander at one of these radar sites. So they had 4 radar sites in Iceland, and I was sent to the northeast tip, which is 15 miles south of the Arctic Circle. And I was stationed there. It was 6 months of dark and 6 months of light. And it snowed, got cold, and the winds would get up to 130, 40 miles an hour. So I stayed there for a year, and I went right back to Syracuse, New York, from where I left, and stayed there until 1962.
What was the mission of the air defense,
In Iceland,
both Iceland and in the United States?
the mission was to detect Russian aircraft that were coming down the Atlantic coast anyway. But we had to track them and keep track of them. We'd send a fighter out to sit alongside them. And Iceland was before it got to the United States. So those radars would pick those Russian ships, airplanes, coming in to our United States. So we had 4 radars there with a fighter interceptor squadron of F-102s at that time. And they would go up and intercept these Russians and make sure they weren't going to affect anybody and track them. And then we'd send them up from the United States to track them while they're going down the Atlantic coast.
Did that happen very often?
Oh, yeah. So from Iceland, I go back to Syracuse. I'm there for another couple of years. In 1962, I get sent to Germany. And I ended up in Freising, Germany, which is close to Munich, as another radar squadron commander. And I had a very interesting incident that happened there. We were teaching the Germans how to run this radar site. And so I was the commander of the American, and they had a Russian commander, and we had a lot of to do.
You mean German commander?
Yes.
Okay.
So one night he asked my wife and I over to his quarters for a toddy. So I get to the front door with my wife, and he says, his wife's there, and he says, "I'd like to introduce you to my wife, Elfrida." And I said, "Well, I'd like to introduce you to my wife, Elfrida." Both identically spelt the same. My wife was a German descent, full German descent, and this other woman was full German. She didn't speak much English, just hi. And he spoke, and we had a couple of drinks, and in the course of the evening, I asked him what he did during the war. So he said, "Well, I was an anti-aircraft commander, battery." I said, where were you on June the 12th, now this is 1962. "Where were you on June the 12th, 1944? And he said, "I was in Calais, France." I said, "Well, you're the guy that shot me down." Now, he was no different than me.
Yeah.
In the military, he was doing his job in the military, and we got along just fine, and it even cemented the relationship closer with an experience like that. How many guys that got shot down found out who shot them down?
It's a small world.
Oh, more than that, yeah.
How was it like working with, let's say, Germans who were 10, 15 years before were your enemies, and then...
It was a miracle because we had we were in NATO at that time, and the French were in NATO. And I later moved from Freising up to Kaiserslautern, where Ramstein Air Force Base is. And I was the head of the air defense of Germany at that time. And on our staff, we had a German officer and we had a French officer. We were together, working together. When the French moved out of NATO, the French officers moved out of our compound. So I did that, and they were installing a new air defense system of radar over in Germany, which was called 412L, made by General Electric. And I'd gone to the General Electric school before I went over there to be that project officer. I didn't end up doing it, but I ended up in this control center. And my boss was bucking for General, and I made a deal with him. I said, if we can bring his system in on time, take me with you, bring it in at a time or ahead of time, I want to go back to flying. So he did and we did, and he put me back into a fighter squadron, F-102s, and the 526 Fighter Interceptor Squadron. And I was the second man in command of that fighter squadron. We had 38 airplanes, and we were flying missions to keep the Russians from coming into Germany.
Now, what type of training did you have to get retrained from propeller
Yes.
to jets?
Yeah, I started out in a T-33, which is a two-seater. Then the F-102s had two-seaters side by side. We got into that, and they have a simulator. And you have to take hours and hours in the simulator, which is just like flying the airplane. Then you finally get up and go. So I finished the tour there, and I was sent back to Hanscom Air Force Base, which is outside of Boston, in Bedford, Mass. And I was assigned to a ground job there again, to a desk. And I was an R&D, and I had the Sea Launch Ballistic Missile Program, BMUs, and NORAD Cheyenne Mountain Computer Update. Those are my three programs. Well, it was supposed to be a 3-year assignment, and at the end of 2 years, they said I'm going to Vietnam to fly a C-47 gunship. Well, I had 27 years in the service at that point. I've been in 2 wars, and I didn't figure that both of my daughters were gone. I only had one daughter left at home, and she was going to college. So I decided I'd like to get out, retire, which I did. So I retired in 1968, and I got immediately into real estate, and I was there for 30 years in Westford, Massachusetts, and I bought a place here in Florida down in Palm City for going here in the winter and going up there summer. And in 1996, I decided I'd had it and I'm going to hang it up. So 1996, I sold everything I had up north and moved to Florida full time, and here I am.
If you could go back into time and give yourself advice, what advice would you give yourself about the military?
Well, I think you have to be more specific about your career rather than just flying an airplane. That's all I ever wanted to do is fly an airplane, but as you get rank, you get more and more responsibility, and you go up into staff or you go into a ground job because you got the rank and experience. If I had to do all over again, I would get on to be a general's assistant or whatever they call them, and try to get promoted faster than what I did. I wasn't a slow promoter, but from a major to colonel was forever. And I was probably the ranking major in the Air Force when I got promoted to colonel. But I didn't have the right job that would give me that prestigious rank.
The experience of certain aspects and the political connections.
Yeah, the political connections really, that's the whole thing. But you're so dumb and young, you don't realize that. If you just want to fly an airplane, so that's about it.
Is there anything else you'd like to say, or?
No,
Yeah. What would, if you could change anything, what would you change back then?
well, like I've said, I had no ambition for rank. It just came. But if like flying an airplane, that was my ambition. If I had to do all over again, I'd have ambition to become a general. I had a captain that worked for me in Germany flying F-102s, and I was a lieutenant colonel. He went on that search. He ended up a 2-star general. That's a lot more money. I don't know that money's important today, but
Let me ask you one last question. Yeah, you got shot down, through the hypothermia, you almost died.
yes.
Was it tough to get back into a cockpit of an airplane after that?
Well, what they did is a lot of fellows were scared that were flying. And you take off from England, you go over the channel, it's safe till you hit the land on the other side. Then the flak starts coming up. So we had what they called an air rescue and an air cap that would take off 4 ships and go up over the channel at 30,000 feet and circle. And they would relay radios from the guys that were already inside. They would also form a rest cap if somebody got into the channel to come down and circle around them to bring the stuff in. The first mission they sent me on was this mission over the channel. A lot of guys would take off and go to the channel and something would be wrong with the airplane, they'd turn around and go back. They call it channel fever. So these guys would eliminate themselves from going into combat. You didn't get any credit for a combat mission going that far until they finally washed out and they'd send them back to the States. The other guys couldn't wait to get over and shoot up another airplane or something.
That was you.
And that was my ambition, was to go. I shot 2 airplanes down in over there. That's all I got. And you had to shoot 5 down to become an ace. So that was it.
What did it feel like to shoot down another airplane?
Oh, it's scary. I shot this one plane down, and the pilot bailed out. And as soon as the pilot gets out of the airplane, he slows right down, and I had to really get out of his way so I didn't hit him. And I have dreams of that yet today. I was there to kill him, not kill him, but to shoot the airplane down. And when I almost ran into him, I thought, man, well, he could damage the airplane to boot.
So there was a degree of honor
Yes.
between the pilots,
Oh, yeah.
both German and
Yeah.
the American?
Yep. Oh, yeah. It was something else. Korea wasn't like that. I saw MiGs, but they were after our jets, not the piston propeller driven planes. But that was it.